All right, hello everybody. Once again, we are going to be doing a responding to the critics. So this came from a Facebook group where I asked someone to give me the strongest arguments against the Spalding-Rigdon theory of the origin of the Book of Mormon. And like I always say, this doesn't really depend upon if the theory is plausible. There are severe problems in the Book of Mormon and internal inconsistencies and many other problems such as that which are found in my book, which shows it not to have come from God. But I also want to provide a foundation on where most likely where this came from. So I put up the arguments here. We're going to look at each of these. We're going to turn to some slides. But what I would urge you to do is please watch my series because I'm going to kind of go fast through these slides. So just want to let y'all know that. Let's begin. Number one, they say is no direct evidence of Spalding's manuscript matching the Book of Mormon. The only known Spalding manuscript story bears no resemblance to the Book of Mormon. Critics claim there was a second lost manuscript, but no physical evidence of it has ever surfaced. Okay, let's start with that latter part. So it is true that we've never recovered the second lost manuscript. Why? Well, think about it. You think Latter-day Saints would really want us to see the second manuscript? No, of course not. So I want to look at. So they say it bears no resemblance to the Book of Mormon. Well, I have to happen to disagree with that because when you look at Solomon Spalding, it's really interesting how he uses these prefixes, roots, and suffixes, and he makes these really neat names from, and he probably used them from the classics, derived them from the classics. So I'm thankful for Lars Nilsson for making this chart here. But you can see on the left-hand side, there's the Fabius story, which is manuscript story, Conduit Creek, which we do have at Oberlin College. And those are the characters mentioned there. But then you also, on the right-hand side, you have manuscript found. And I think it's really interesting, and Lars pointed this out, that you have on the right-hand side these Book of Mormon names like Amulek, Amaleki, so forth, Am, right? But what's interesting to me is, as Lars pointed out, is the H sound of Ham, right? The H was dropped off from the Book of Mormon characters, but on the left-hand side you can see that there is Ham, Hamak, Hamalek, and so it's just interesting to see that there is this pattern of the names. So I think that's interesting. Okay. There's also a possibility of where Solomon Spalding may have gotten some of these names. So I'm just going to mention two here that I think are really highly plausible. Like down there at the very bottom, the Kishkamentus River. Well, the character Kishkamen probably was named from that. And so I think that's something that's really highly possible. Okay. So there's characters. Now I'm going to turn to slide 199. So let me get there, please. Okay, so they say it bears no resemblance to the Book of Mormon, but yet we have to take what the witnesses said. And so it's interesting here that they said the title of it was manuscript found. Now, of course, we know that the title was changed. But they say it was a historical novel. First settlers of America, descendants were, which would be the Native Americans, the journey from Jerusalem, Nephi and Lehi main characters, quarrels and contentions, two nations, bloody wars, arts and sciences, and a king to pass, no religious matter, which is really interesting because that's an undesigned coincidence. Because later on we would see that Rigdon would implant and put in scripture references. 13, forts and mounds, obsolete style, the King James Version style, the judgment which they supposed were coming on the whole world, account of Laban, humorous passages, Moroni, Straits of Darien, which would be the Panama, I Nephi, verbal alterations and additions, red mark on forehead. So all of those you would see do actually match up with what is called the Book of Mormon. Okay. And in slide 764, so I want to turn there. So in slide 764, this is an article that was written by James C. Bales. So if you don't mind, I want to skip just a little bit of this, but he starts to point out points of similarity between the Oberlin College manuscript and the Book of Mormon. Okay. And you can see here that he believes that there are around 75, around 75 parallels. And then it's interesting that Vernal Holly points out these themes that are found, like the Indian origins, finding the records, sea voyage, promised land, unusual worship, the solar system, the exploration. There is the cultural technology, theology, divine reformer, government, money, fortifications. Now this one to me is very interesting. Stolen daughters. In Spalding's story, the war ending the long peace was caused by the seduction of the king's daughter Lamessa and her friend Heliza. They were stolen and carried off by the young prince of Kentuck. In the Book of Mormon, a war was caused by the priest of King Noah, who had stolen and did carry away the daughters of the Lamanites. In both stories, the seduced women married their seducers. Tribes, Searstone, the wars, battle at Hill Ripla, the letters, the last great battle. There's word parallels between manuscript story and the Book of Mormon. So we have these words here. We have character names sharing unique word patterns, which I was showing you before. So here they are showing you on here, like ham and lamb and gam. Yeah. Now it's interesting in the Book of Mormon, so you would see am, anti, core, and then Zen, Z, hell, more, she, and some others like that. So just another thing to think about is the "oh come to pass" that was found. That's interesting that the witnesses point that out, and it's interesting that manuscript story does not contain "and it came to pass." They did a frequent word patterns search. And so I think that it's wrong to say that there's no resemblance between the first manuscript and the Book of Mormon. But you can listen to my other videos on my third edition part series. Just let everyone know about that. Number 2, no documented connection between Rigdon and Joseph Smith before 1830. No contemporary evidence shows that Sidney Rigdon and Joseph Smith met before the publication of the Book of Mormon. Rigdon was a Campbellite preacher in Ohio, and earlier church records placed Joseph in New York with no clear link between them. Okay, so for this one, I would like to go to slides 666. Okay, so this is slides 669. And you see that there is Pomeroy Tucker, Mrs. Eaton, Abel Chase. There is Erasmus Turner, S.F. Anderwick, W.A. Lilly, Lorenzo Saunders, Emily Coburn. And then here, so those are the ones who believe they saw Sidney Rigdon with Joseph Smith. So that's just false that there is a connection, and there actually are some gaps in Rigdon's timeline, and that's what this was about. And you can look and see where the eyewitnesses placed Rigdon and that would actually be in some of the that was actually in some of the areas that they actually talked about when he came to see Joseph Smith. All right, let's go back. There is number 3. Eyewitness testimony confirms Joseph's direct involvement. Multiple eyewitnesses, including Oliver Cowdery, Martin Harris, and Emma Smith, described Joseph dictating the Book of Mormon without any manuscripts or outside sources. If Rigdon had secretly written it, where is the evidence of Joseph using or referring to any pre-existing document? And that's a good question. So we are kind of pivoting one set of eyewitnesses versus another set of eyewitnesses. So one of the question I would have is, why did Joseph Smith put up a blanket between him and Martin Harris? That's something that I would really like for us to think about. So I really can't say much about this one. Okay. Number 4, Book of Mormon language and complexity. The Book of Mormon contains complex internal consistency. Ancient literary structures like chiasmus and references to Hebraic traditions that would have been unknown to either Spalding. Now, I would say that that's false, that Spalding, he went to Dartmouth and he would have learned things like this at the ministry, and possibly highly Rigdon too. If it were copied from a fictional 19th century manuscript, how did it end up with linguistic and structure patterns reflecting ancient Near Eastern texts? Okay. All right, so I had to disagree with internal consistency. Yes, it is true that it is complex because Spalding spent years on this manuscript and making it. But it is not internally consistent, which shows that it could not have come from God. So I want to point out something here. We're going to look at 1150. There are several contradictions. Just give you one example is, it says, I believe 4 times in the Book of Mormon, our first parents were beguiled. But the Bible says Adam was not beguiled. That's a contradiction. Shows that they are not consistent. Okay? And there's other ones that we could point out. I want to show you this one, 1151. Okay, so what we have here, okay, so the birth of Jacob was in 594 BC, or somewhere around there. Birth of Mosiah the second, 154 BC, so it's 440 years. So what I'm trying to show here is, so you have the plates being delivered, right, from Lehi, and then to Nephi, Jacob, Enos, Jerome, Omni, Amram, Chemish, Abinadam, Amalekai, and then finally Benjamin, right? King Benjamin. So my question about all this is, okay, you got 7 generations. Even if we were to give them 25 years or 30 years or 40 years per generation, so we're still even being very, gracious, 280 years. So the time span of Jacob's birth, which would be 594, to Mosiah's birth, you have 440 years, okay? And so that's minus 280 years, sets at 7 generations every 40 years. So there's 160 missing years from that. So that makes it not internally consistent. See, and that's what I'm trying to tell about here. Another major problem, I believe, is Malachi. So Malachi is found in 1st Nephi and 2nd Nephi. But then when you go to 3rd Nephi, which is much later, Jesus said to the Nephites, you did not have these scriptures with you, but certainly we see Malachi was being quoted. Okay, so that's internally inconsistent. Let's go back. Number 5, Sidney Rigdon's own denials. Rigdon himself publicly denied any role in writing the Book of Mormon. If he had secretly authored it, why did he never take credit even after his falling out with church leadership? Well, I'm glad you asked that question, because when we go to slide 593, so I would actually urge you to read all of these people from um, uh, from Rebecca Johnson Eichbaum. Read about her and when she was at the post office. We have Joseph Miller. We have John Winter, who claims that he told his daughter and his, I believe, son-in-law this, but he said that Rigdon showed him the manuscript of Spalding. Riddick McKee, Amarilla Dunlap, which is the niece of Rigdon. Cephas Dodd, but that's secondhand. Harvey Baldwin is secondhand. Deacon Clapp and Redfield. Josiah Spalding secondhand. C. Henry secondhand. We have Dency Thompson, who stayed with the Rigdon family for some time. We have William Smith, R.W. Alderman, secondhand though. William Smith, secondhand. John C. Bennett. So he says, remember he became high up in the Mormon Church. Now I know that there was a falling out between Joseph Smith and him. But what's interesting is there's an affidavit by Sarah Pratt, the wife of one of the Pratt brothers. What was her name? Oh, just one moment, and I can tell you real quick. I think maybe Sarah Pratt, yeah. Who was married to who? Well, anyways, she said that what John Bennett had written in his book was true. Okay. So I found that very interesting. So John Bennett wrote, our remark here in confirmation of the above, the Book of Mormon was originally written by the Reverend Solomon Spalding as a romance and entitled The Manuscript Found, placed by him in the printing office of Patterson and Lambden in the city of Pittsburgh, from whence it was taken by a conspicuous Mormon divine and remodeled by adding the religious portion placed by him in Smith's possession, and then published to the world as the testimony exemplifies. This I have from the Confederation, and of its perfect correctness there is not a shadow of a doubt. There never were any plates of the Book of Mormon, except what were seen by the spiritual and not the natural eyes of the witnesses. The story of the plates is all chimerical. All right, so you have him, but then you have James Jeffrey. So this is the fallout after with Joseph Smith, and Rigdon leaves and he goes to St. Louis. So James Jeffrey wrote, I know more about the Mormons than any man east of the Alleghenies. Although I have given no attention to the matter for 25 years, I did not know I was in possession of any information concerning the Book of Mormon unknown to others. I suppose that as Rigdon was so open with me, he had told others the same thing. 40 years ago, I was in business in St. Louis. The Mormons had had their temple in Nauvoo. I had business transactions with them. Sidney Rigdon I knew very well. He was general manager of the affairs of the Mormons. Rigdon, in hours of conversation, told me a number of times there was in the printing office with which he was connected in Ohio. Now that is wrong detail. A manuscript of Reverend Spalding tracing the origin of the Indian race from the lost tribes of Israel. That this manuscript was in the office for several years and that he was familiar with it. That Spalding had wanted it printed but had not the money to pay for the printing, but that he and Joe Smith used to look over the manuscript and read it over Sundays. So you can see there's this and so you can see there that James Jeffrey was told this by Sidney Rigdon. But you also have the grandson of Sidney Rigdon. So so Sidney Rigdon's grandson, Mr. Walter Sidney Rigdon, is a citizen of Carrollton, Cattaraugus County, New York, and a grandson of Sidney Rigdon, the partner of Joe Smith. He talked with Ode Sidney hundreds of times about the scheme of the Golden Bible, and his father still has many of the Ode Sidney's documents. Grandfather was a religious crank, says Mr. Rigdon, until he lost money by it. He started in as a Baptist preacher and had a very fine congregation for those days in Pittsburgh. There was no reason at all for his leaving except that he got cracked. At the time, he had no ideas of making money, and indeed, while he was with the Mormons, his chances to make money were good enough for most men, but he came out of it about as poor as he went in. But how did he change first? Was asked. Well, he tried to understand the prophecies. The man who does that is sure to go crazy. He said the prophets and baptism. Of course, he got rattled. Daniel and Ezekiel and Revelations will rattle any man who gives his whole mind to them. At any rate, they did him, and he joined Alexander Campbell, and Campbell didn't believe that the end of the world was nigh. His millennial harbinger shows that they rattled all who listened to them in Ohio and other places. Then grandfather got disgusted and decided on a new deal. He found Joe Smith, and they had a great many talks together before they brought out the plates. None of us ever doubted that they got the whole thing up, but father always maintained that the grandfather helped get up the original Spalding book. At any rate, he got a copy very early and schemed on some way to make it useful. Although the family knew these facts, they refused to talk on the subject while grandfather lived. In fact, he and they took on a huge disgust at the whole subject. Okay. All right, so we have that. All right, number 6. Uh, Spalding's widow and associates later recanted or contradicted themselves. The claim that Spalding's work was the basis of the Book of Mormon comes largely from affidavits collected decades after the fact, some of which contradict each other or were later recanted. No reliable contemporary source confirms the theory. Okay. So I understand that it is true that they collected affidavits decades after the fact. That's true. I would like for somebody to show me evidence as to where these were either recanted or contradictory to each other. Please, I would like to hear about that more. Number 7, the lack of motive. If Rigdon had secretly written the Book of Mormon, what was his incentive? Why would he allow Joseph Smith to lead the church while he remained in the background rather than asserting his own authorship? Okay, so I don't know fully why Rigdon did this, but if you do go to slide 1406. So interesting enough, George Q. Cannon wrote about 2nd Nephi 3. Now, 2nd Nephi 3 talks about, and just in case you forget, it talks about a spokesman. So there's a supposed prophecy of Joseph Smith in 2nd Nephi 3, but there's also a spokesman to be made for Joseph Smith. And so I find it very interesting that there was George Cannon, and he wrote about this. So he actually says, and he says, see, there's a prophecy here about Sidney Rigdon in the Book of Mormon. Because he says, thus you see that even this, which many might look upon as a small matter, was predicted about 1,700 years before the birth of the Savior, was quoted by Lehi 600 years before the same event, and about 240 2,400 years before its fulfillment, and was translated by the power of God through his servant Joseph, as was predicted should be the case. And at a time I have said where there was not a man upon the earth who was a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So I believe that Sidney Rigdon, he wanted to be a spokesperson for Joseph. Now, when you go to slides 1486, so there is a power struggle between Smith and Rigdon. And in fact, it's really interesting to me. Stephen Shields, he writes about he thinks that it should be called the Smith-Rigdon movement. And he says, the Doctrine and Covenants and other sources clearly demonstrate that Sidney Rigdon was not second to Joseph Smith, but an equal partner. Okay, and he talks about how contributions of Rigdon and how he helped with this. And you can see this in many of the slides. So 1009. So I believe that Sidney Rigdon, it's really hard to know his mind. But he started to believe in these principles. Now, don't get me wrong. And like I talk about in my series, we should want to go back to the Bible and what it teaches as the truth. But what Sidney Rigdon did was he took it to some extremes, because the age of miracles was temporary, and yet he wanted them to be long lasting. He wanted spiritual gifts to be ongoing. And so I believe that Rigdon wanted to make this book, the Book of Mormon, to be something that could be as a foundation for their movement. I think maybe Whitsitt is right about this. Whitsitt provides this is a third alternative to this long-standing prophet fraud dichotomy. Early Mormon leaders were sincere men trying to restore the true Church of Christ, and the Book of Mormon was a pseudepigraphal attempt to provide a foundation for their movement. And so, and we see, Sidney Rigdon did help with the Kirtland Bank thing, right? Did he not help, wanted to run for vice president, and Joseph Smith was running for president what was his motive? Only he truly knows this. But I kind of see the motives behind all. I kind of see what in a sense might have driven him to do this, But you could see, like we talked about, he did let out some secrets to James Jeffrey, okay, to John C. Well, not John C. Bennett, but John C. Bennett said he learned it from the Confederation itself. So I hope that helps. Like I said, this theory is, it's not perfect. And why would it be perfect? I don't expect it to be perfect. But it does, I believe, shed light on why the Book of Mormon does contradict the Bible, and then why later on it, Doctrine and Covenants contradicts the Book of Mormon, and why Book of Abraham's not a true book from God. It's, funeral texts of Egyptian and so forth, that they start to fall into place, and why Joseph Smith's prophecies did not come true, and why there's not true miracles done among Latter-day Saints, and so on and so forth. This explains those things. Okay, so I really appreciate trying to tackle this. I appreciate the answer to this. So, anyways, Just wanted to let you know. Just wanted to try to answer these questions, and I hope that this helped. Thank you so much.